Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Overseas Cultural Orientation Updates from CO Coordinators Worldwide. I am Sanja Bebic, the Director of the Cultural Orientation Resource Center at the Center for Applied Linguistics. And this is a yearly webinar we host, and I am joined today by my 9 colleagues from 9 refugee support centers around the world who oversee CO program activities at those refugee support centers. The structure of today's webinar will be to begin with an overview of overseas CO, to talk about some of the commonalities between the different programs, and then to go into individual presentations by our 9 presenters who will talk more specifically about highlights and updates from their programs. We will conclude the webinar with a question and answer period. Many of you submitted questions during the registration process. We will begin by answering some of those questions, and we will also invite you to submit additional questions in the chat box. All participants are muted during the duration of the webinar, but we will be monitoring the chat box and answering as many questions as time allows in the next hour and a half for the duration of the webinar. And we will also work following the webinar on answering any questions that we may not have had the opportunity to answer during the course of the webinar. The webinar will conclude with a brief survey for all participants, so we encourage you to take the time to fill out that survey because we look at the information in the survey very closely and use it to design the next webinar in this series. So here is the list of today's presenters. They will present in this order. We will move from one to the other, starting with Rhonda Fleischer and concluding with Peter Vogelar. To get us started with a brief overview of overseas CO for U.S.-bound refugees in general, this is a map and a slide that can be found on our website, culturalorientation.net. We will also post the PowerPoint at the end of following the webinar. It's a lot of information on the slide, but this is just briefly to give you an overview of the numerous locations in which RSCs and CO programs they conduct are located, and the variety of organizations and approaches that are represented in CO design and delivery for U.S.-bound refugees. So with the understanding that there are a variety of agencies that are contracted to provide overseas orientation, and as I mentioned, the fact that we'll be hearing about the specifics of various programs in a minute, here are some of the things that all of the programs share. One is that all of the programs receive funding and oversight from Department of State, Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, regardless of what the agency is that is delivering the programs. The other commonality is content, about which I will say a few more words in a minute, and then staff training, and the last one, the importance of the CO continuum. So in terms of content, all of the programs cover these topics. I will not read through them. Another pretty recent feature that has been introduced into the CO continuum, starting from overseas and through reception and placement orientation, is the creation of a document called the Objectives and Indicators document. A working group called the Cultural Orientation Working Group worked over an extended period of time with many stakeholders, including stakeholders, resettlement agencies, federal partners, CAL, our CO colleagues, and others, to look at the basic knowledge, skills, and attitudes that we would hope refugees come out of orientation having acquired, both overseas and domestically. We created two documents, two sister documents. One is codifies the content for overseas orientation, and is the Overseas Objectives and Indicators document, and the other one that was recently completed does the same thing for RMP orientation. So the basic content of overseas orientation in all of the programs is aligned with the Objectives and Indicators document. The document is on our website, and for those of you who work for resettlement agencies, you also would have seen this document from both of these documents from your headquarters. Another thing that programs both share and have some flexibility around is foundational materials for orientation. So CAL produces Welcome to the United States book and video, which is in use in all of the programs, but all of the programs also create targeted materials in their locations for the particular populations that they work with and for their particular programs. And they will say more about that when they speak about their programming. All of the programs is that staff that both design and deliver orientation in various locations receive extensive training prior to entering the CO classroom and delivering orientation, and also ongoing staff development. And finally, all of the programs rely on feedback from the domestic resettlement community through various channels, including the CAL listserv, PRM, and other channels of communication, to keep content current and to continue to meet the needs of both refugees and those who serve them domestically by addressing key issues and timely issues that can help foster successful resettlement for refugees once they arrive in the United States. So these are just some general observations in terms of commonalities between programs, and I will now turn it to my colleague Rhonda from RSC Africa, who will begin our particular program presentations location by location. And just a final word before Rhonda picks up the microphone. All of this information, including the resources and the map with details about specific programs, etc., is on the CAL website, so you're welcome to take a look at that after the webinar.
Good afternoon. As Sonia mentioned, my name is Rhonda Fleischer. I'm the CO coordinator for RSC Africa. And I just wanted to start by sort of reinforcing the idea that we do see CO as a continuum, and our role is very much focused on the pre-arrival part of a refugee's experience, travel, the initial months in the U.S. In order to give them a good start for resettlement agencies to take it from there. We really try to incorporate key messages throughout the process. So, we're providing some information from the first point of contact that RSC has with refugees. For instance, we've developed these posters. So as you can see on the screen, these are some examples. And we post these at RSC and CIS interview sites. We find various ways to use them to reinforce the importance of learning English. The pipeline is long, those types of things. And then, of course, they're used in our cultural orientation training sessions. So our cultural orientation classes happen in a variety of locations. In Kenya, all of our training happens in Nairobi. Camp cases are trained in a CO classroom at the Nairobi Transit Center. And all Ethiopian departures are trained at the Transit Center in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Urban cases in Nairobi are trained at the RSC office. And in all three of these classrooms, we have the ability to provide examples of a model Western kitchen, airplane seats. In some locations, we have a washer and dryer, an airplane bathroom, and all these things are make the training experience obviously that much richer. However, we train throughout sub-Saharan Africa. So RSC Africa, we're covering an area that covers 49 different countries. Specifically on this map, you'll see that the dark green areas are those locations where we're actively processing. Last year in FY13, we did CO training in 24 different countries. And in most of those locations, it really is a variety of different settings where we're doing circuit rides, setting up impromptu classrooms in urban centers, camp locations, and a variety of different venues. In terms of who we're serving, Somalis continue to be the largest part of our caseload. In FY13, they were about half of those trained. And the Congolese are definitely becoming a much larger portion of the caseload, increasing from 19% last year up to 31% in FY13. Central Africans, Ethiopians, and Eritreans are smaller groups, and a whole variety of other groups. Altogether, we served 23 different nationalities last year. So in terms of our classes, we do a standard CO for adults for those 15 and above, and this is 3 to 5 working days depending on the location for about 6 hours a day. Since May, we've begun consistently doing 5 days of CO for those locations with a high Congolese caseload, and that training is specifically geared towards the Congolese. This map shows those countries where we are doing the 5 days of CO. So it's primarily in the Great Lakes region and parts of Southern Africa. We do have some classes for children and youth. For Somali youth, we do an additional day of training for Somalis aged 15 to 26 over and above the standard class that they attend. And we also have a child CO class and a youth class in Kenya, Chad, and Rwanda. And then unaccompanied refugee minors receive training as well, specifically geared towards their needs. That's about 3 hours. Of course, if they're in a location where there's child or youth CO, they would attend that and then also get additional information on the URM program. So similar to the list that Sonia shared, these are the topics that we cover in our standard curriculum. And they're based on the objectives and indicators. Key messages are delivered throughout all of these topics, and they're tailored to a certain extent. Some topics are emphasized more than others, depending on the group that we're training. So just wanted to mention a few things that we've noticed amongst the growing Congolese caseload. I won't go into all of them here, just to note. I did want to point out that it's been really noted, the diversity within the caseload, and this is something that many of the refugees we've trained have specifically identified. That it's not one unified group, and we see some real differences between urban cases and camp cases, for example. Things like hygiene we've seen is really needing a lot more attention, especially when it comes to the camp cases and children in particular. So I'll just end with a little plug. We do have an email set up for refugees who've arrived to the U.S. And we encourage them to write to us by way of email and give us feedback on what they, how useful this CO we provided was, what they wish they'd heard more about. And if you do have an African refugee in your office, please feel free to reinforce the message and provide the email. We also have an email for partners, which I'm sharing with you as well. Okay, so I'm now going to turn over the microphone to my colleague, Pat.
Thank you, Rhonda. My name is Pat Blaschel. I'm the CO manager at the RSC Austria in Vienna, Austria. I'm starting off with a sort of a straightforward slide giving you some facts about our caseload and the way we teach the class. I'll try not to read that for you. We do have a very unique program and caseload. We only work with Iranian religious minorities. That includes Mandaeans, Christians, Jewish people, Zoroastrian, and Baha'i people. So it's just Iranians that we're working with. We're very lucky to have one central office where we do the trainings. You can see we have a good class attendance rate. We also, I think, share other things with some of my colleagues. We focus on very lively and respectful engagement with our classes. We have a learner-centered class, and that's, I think, something I could say about all the other classes that you'll be hearing about today. We don't have a large staff, but we sort of try to stay flexible enough so that we can deal with the people that are coming down the pipeline. Some of the things that make this caseload unique are sort of blessings. For example, our clients generally have a very high level of education. They also, many of the Iranian students have pretty good English relative to some other caseloads. I think that's an advantage they will have in the U.S. They also have traveled outside of Iran, and that helps them to sort of be ready for a new culture. They've seen other cultures besides Iran, and they're ready to see something else. But I think one of the advantages that they have can sort of be a blessing and a curse, and that is that many of them are joining, or most of them are joining family and friends, and actually large Iranian communities in the U.S. Almost all of our applicants are joining U.S. ties in the U.S. So this is good and bad, largely because the bad part would be that they've heard a lot about the U.S. before they get to our class. They've heard a lot from their friends and family, and the problem is some of what they've heard is misinformation, half true, or just plain wrong. So this means a lot of hard work for CO trainers and CO interpreters. We need to adjust some of this information and adjust some of their expectations. We try to do this gently, but sometimes we can't really be so gently. We have to be very clear that some of what they may have heard is not completely true. So one way that we do that in a kind of playful way is that we introduce the idea that in the U.S., as in Iran, children play a game called telephone, where they sit in a circle and one of them whispers something to the next, and then that person whispers to the next, and of course this information passes around the circle and it gets very distorted. This illustration sometimes gets a laugh, but it also, I think, sets up the class for the idea that they'll need to be ready to think about the U.S. in a different way. They might not have gotten the whole story. One thing that also is true is that as much as they've heard about the U.S., true and not true, they haven't heard hardly anything about resettlement agencies. So that's kind of an unfortunate combination of things. We try to be real clear about the role of the resettlement agency. We try to talk about things like core services and help them to understand that there will be somebody working with their U.S. tie to help them get to a good start in the U.S. I think we try to sort of walk a thin line between suggesting that they may not have heard the whole story. We don't want to suggest that they've been deceived or purposely deceived by their friends and family, but we do want to make sure they understand what it's really going to be like. So what we do is we play a role-playing game, and we ask the applicants to play the role of U.S. ties, refugees, and resettlement agencies, and we find that as soon as they have to play the role of a resettlement agency worker, they start to think, oh, well, we couldn't realistically do this, we couldn't do that. I think the beautiful thing is by the end of that exercise, they sort of understand that they're going to have to take responsibility of their own resettlement, and they're going to have to become self-sufficient as soon as possible. That's about what I wanted to talk about today. It's sort of one of the unique things about our program. I'll turn it over now to my colleague, Ana Maria from Cuba.
Good afternoon. My name is Ana Maria Machado. I'm from RSC Havana, Cuba. We have in Havana an in-country program. Our goals are about 5,000 refugees per year. The cultural orientation duration is about 10 hours, divided in 4 sessions. The content is about the resettlement agreement, the video sessions, resettlement agency rules, airport regulation, and question and answer session. In Cuba, we have not specific cultural orientation classes. For that reason, we look at CO as a continued process. We have 4 meetings with refugees and use each appointment in our office to introduce the CO information. In our waiting area, we have posters provided by call with important information about all the steps in the resettlement process. The applicant also watched 2 videos which are shown every day with real testimonials of different refugee families resettled in different cities in the U.S. We take the pre-screen interview date as first step in our presentations. We provide applicants the resettlement agreement with an information folio and also explain them how to fill the agreement and the importance of give accurate information of relatives in U.S. The infofolio covers all the steps during the process and also explains the role of the sponsoring agencies, and we provide them in 3 times. In the first pre-screen interview, in the users interview, and at the booking date. This service to our office is on the date scheduled to book the flight. On booking date, we inform them the place of their resettlement and which sponsoring agency is in charge of the case. We also show the map with the city and state. We provide them welcome books, printed resume with info regarding the travel day and the role of the resettlement agency. The day before flight, we conduct a deep cultural orientation session of 4 hours. We place a video, give them detailed information on IPOR process in Cuba and after the arrival, and conducted a question and answer session. The refugee coordinator also participates in this last contact and gives them a brief of how is the life in the United States. Now, I would like to introduce my colleague, Kelly from East Asia. Thank you.
Before Kelly speaks, this is Sonia again. I just want to remind everyone that you are able to submit questions in the chat box. If you wish to do so as we proceed with the webinar, you are welcome to do that. And also, you will be able to write in the chat box with questions at the end of the presentations and the beginning of the question and answer period. Kelly?
Thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Kelly and I'm the Cultural Orientation Coordinator for East Asia. This is a snapshot of East Asia CO. So when I say East Asia, really, we are based in Bangkok and most of our refugees are coming to you from Thailand and from Malaysia. We have 12 locations in those two countries. And as you can see, many nationalities and almost triple that ethnicities. CO for us is generally 3 to 5 days, depending on location. Classes can be anywhere from 1 person to over 30, ages 8 and up, mixed ages, mixed languages, mixed education and literacy levels, mixed backgrounds and abilities. Like everyone else, we're covering about 14 different topics. We have about 50 lessons in our manual and 59 mandatory key points that we cover, whether that's a 1 hour CO, 1 day, 3 days, or 5 days. This gives you a little bit clearer picture of our population. I've listed populations from Malaysia and Thailand, only those populations that are over 100 people. So although we have refugees from everywhere, the majority of our refugees are coming from Burma, either across the border into Thailand or down in. You can see the key populations for Malaysia and for Thailand. So predominantly Chin, Malaysia, predominantly Karen for Thailand. I'll just speak a little bit about Thailand and Malaysia because although most of our refugees are all from Burma, the contexts are quite different. Our refugees in Thailand live in camps for the most part and have for many, many years. They typically are not employed and adults anyway have lower literacy and education levels. That's not really the case for children. Children who've grown up in the camps, both boys and girls, attend school and literacy and education levels are pretty good for under 18. Important themes for Thailand are self-sufficiency. I think that obviously is connected to the context and to the culture, but coming from refugee camps, waiting is a skill. That's what they do. So that can be problematic when they are trying to resettle, as many of you have found out, I'm sure. We stress early employment, and of course English is a continuous theme for all of our participants. Malaysia is a bit different. Most of our Malaysian refugees are living in urban settings. Many of them work, not legally, so security is always an issue for them. They typically live in crowded urban settings, either in the capital or throughout the country of Malaysia. They are typically much more self-reliant than our refugees coming from Thailand. And I think that this maybe connects to the secondary migration that some of you are experiencing with the Chin. And that's something that we really focus on quite a bit in CO. So we've recently just introduced a third opportunity during CO class for people to declare or confirm their U.S. Thai information and have begun the message that refugees who outmigrate will no longer be eligible for initial resettlement assistance if they move from their original location. It's a little bit too early for us. Departures were down in October and November, so we don't know yet what this message will, what the response will be, but the message is there. We also talk about realistic expectations. This is with all of our populations, but is maybe stressed a little bit more with our Malaysia populations. And again, English is a common theme. We have a very well-developed curriculum for adults. I won't say a lot about that. It's also responsive, so when we get feedback, we can alter lessons to stress different things. I think what was really exciting is last year we formalized our children and youth curriculum. Children and youth are a big part of our CO, so we now have a standardized curriculum for children and for youth. And the topics are similar to adults, although we've added another unit called Life Skills. Our methodology is one of participation. We try to make accessing information as involved and participatory as possible. We also have demonstration rooms, bathrooms and kitchens for those who are not familiar with Western facilities. We have a video for kids. And because of the scope of our program, we've really looked at ensuring consistency of messages, and we do that through a multi-layered approach that involves our standardized key points. We had monitoring officers who were from U.S. resettlement for 2 years, and we have other methods of ensuring quality. So I will wrap up and be happy for any questions you might have later. Thank you. And I'd just like to introduce my colleague Stas.
Hello everyone, my name is Stanislav Shulukhin and I'm CO coordinator for RSC Eurasia, and we're based in Moscow, Russia. Our program was founded in the year 2000, and at first we just covered the area of the former Soviet Union, so all of the republics, but later on we had a few locations in Europe that were added with the opening of the emergency transit center in Romania and later in Slovakia. And also we have a quite a large caseload coming out of Malta, so mainly Somalis and Eritreans. So we cover a lot of nationalities, as you can see here, over 15, and this can be one of the most challenging for CO delivery. Like sometimes we might have several languages in the same group, and this can be a bit challenging for our trainers. These are some myths that we sometimes and quite often hear from the refugees in the classroom. So I'm not going to read out, I'm just going to comment on a few of them. Like we hear a lot from the young Somalis in Malta that they expect that the resettlement agency is going to pay for their education, and they're getting quite upset that that is not covered, and that education in the United States is not for free for adults. Some raise questions, as you can see here, like about Minnesota is the best place for Somalis. Some raise questions about the secondary migration, and we use different case studies to show that it's best for refugees not to move anywhere for at least for the first year and then make an informed decision. So here you can see the main objectives of the training. So we try to meet these objectives through interactive teaching techniques, moving from the known to the unknown, using discussions, comparisons, peer teaching, role play, group work, brainstorming, case studies, and some questions that Cal have shared with us that came from you. I just wanted to address it here, like about the mental health issues. We visit these topics at different times throughout the sessions, and also this is probably one of our strongest sides of our RSC, is that all of our CO trainers are also caseworkers, so we actually do get to meet with refugees at earliest stages of processing, so we actually know them quite well before we do cultural orientation for them. We also have the two videos available that help us a lot. It's Welcome to US video that was developed by Cal, and that also has covers certain healthcare and mental health issues. And also there was a fantastic video which was produced by the state of Ohio. I think it was Safe, Smart, and Healthy, which also covers this topic. Sometimes when we show it after the class, a lot of people take a lot of interest and stay to watch it. Okay, we have quite a diverse crowd of people, so you can see that we have like refugees who have US ties and for whom we unfortunately have to do shorter sessions, and some refugees, like P1 refugees who don't have US ties, we do longer sessions for them. So areas of specific emphasis can depend on many different aspects, but regardless of what populations they are, these are the main focus. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to introduce Matthew to you. He is from RSC Latin America.
Hi, my name is Matt Chiquetto, and I'm the CO focal point at RSC Latin America. First, I'm going to give you some basic information on our program before delving into some of our specific program details. CO is held in Quito in our newly renovated IOM offices. Attendees transport, meals, lodging, and daycare while in Quito is covered by the program. We held our first CO in Quito in February 2013. Since the beginning of this calendar year, we've held 9 sessions with a total of 185 participants. Attendees thus far have been exclusively Colombian, of Mestizo, Indigenous, and Afro-Colombian descent between ages 12 and 65. New locations for CO in the Latin American region and the Caribbean, as well as other nationalities, are likely to participate in CO depending on demand. Our 15-hour program is divided among 3 days. CO is conducted in Spanish with no use of interpreters. Colombians tend to be very entertaining and an engaging group in CO. They definitely aren't afraid to ask questions. Some of their questions include they worry about their low level of English as a barrier to finding work. Another concern is regarding finding employment and being fairly treated at work, since labor exploitation and discrimination are common among refugee and asylum seekers in Ecuador. These groups pay close attention on how long government benefits will last and worry about finding work before benefits run out. And our 3 CO facilitators field many questions about family reunification in terms of elderly and extended family members. RSC Latin America's curriculum has been developed and based on the overseas objectives and indicators and follows them closely. We currently use the Welcome to the US 2008 video and activities to reinforce content messages. Specialized activities are developed in-house based on feedback from refugees resettled to the US that were interviewed during the 2013 CO Trainers Exchange. We use feedback from resettlement agencies and affiliates that I also met during the exchange, and from questions posed via the core website refugee discussions. I'm going to focus on two somewhat unique activities that cover the following topics: maintaining a partnership and good rapport with your caseworker, and punctuality and steps after arrival. In our activity that focuses on refugees maintaining a good partnership with their resettlement agency caseworker, we showed the group of refugees different photos, and their expectations regarding responsibilities of the resettlement agency are assessed. We also used the time to repeat and reinforce details of help provided by the resettlement agency, such as enrollment in ESL classes and job search orientation. After looking at the photo we show them, participants lift up an acceptable or unacceptable sign, depending on what they think. Facilitators ask them to explain why something is acceptable or unacceptable to expect from their caseworker. Most participants agree that waking their caseworker at 3 in the morning to ask them about a bus schedule, or using their resettlement agency as a taxi service to get to the supermarket are both unacceptable. Thus far, participants have reacted enthusiastically to the activity. You can see in the picture smiles, although we're talking about something that's unacceptable. Explaining that it's probably not the best idea to invite your caseworker out for a beer, it still requires a bit of explanation, though. Our fresh out of the oven activity is called Recipe for Success. American motto, time is money. The activity pairs major steps in the arepa recipe with events in the refugees' lives once they arrive in the United States. In the activity, participants are divided into two groups. One group is given laminated cards with pictures and text corresponding to the steps of a successful recipe, while the other is given steps for a recipe that will provoke some challenges in the kitchen. Both groups first put in order the steps of their recipe, then stand in corresponding order, holding or wearing the cards. After both groups have their recipes in order, they discuss which recipe turned out better, based on pictures of the final products, and then are asked why. In every cooking step of the unsuccessful group, whether it's burning the butter or not letting the dough rest long enough, time is the major slip-up. This activity is really good at showing when they flip over their cards, different steps in the resettlement process. Some examples include arriving early for a job interview and leaving a positive first impression with a potential employer, or how missing your medical appointment will cause delays in children receiving vaccinations and starting school. This activity is available on the core website and can be developed for any other population that has a great recipe. So bon appetit. Now I'm going to introduce my colleague Jamal from RSC Middle East, North Africa.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jamal Al-Fakouri. I'm the Regional Cultural Orientation Coordinator for the RSC Middle East and North Africa, based in Amman, Jordan. I want to give you a brief about our program. First of all, what do we cover? Basically, any country in the blue is covered by RSC Amman, Middle East and North Africa, and the red is covered by the RSC ICFC Istanbul. So we have a large region to cover, but the bulk of our refugees are Iraqis. Just to give you an idea for fiscal year 2015 numbers, we have provided training for a total of 5,750. Our attendance record for those who are invited is about 80%, which is pretty good. However, not everybody is attending CO. It's not a mandatory requirement on behalf of the refugees. And as you know, because of the civil war in Syria, we have stopped offering CO since June 2012 because of the danger that refugees will face accessing the IOM office. And also the continuing terrorist attacks and bombings in Baghdad and around the areas of Baghdad make accessing the IOM office is almost also a daily challenge for both our staff and our refugees. This slide talks about the refugee arrivals to the U.S. I'm talking specifically about Iraqis who have arrived since the inception of the program back in 2007. So as you can see, the Detroit, in Michigan, San Diego, and Phoenix, Houston, Dallas, Los Angeles, Atlanta are the highest number, the cities that have hosted the highest number of Iraqis. Now some people ask us, what do you teach refugees in the classroom? I wish we are teaching them about baseball, but we're not. We're actually teaching them about, this is the problem that you all are well aware of. We are also aware that our biggest challenge is the high expectations when refugees arrive to the U.S. We deal with this problem by emphasizing our key messages, the self-sufficiency, to rely on yourself, and to lower the expectations. We do not lecture the refugees. We rely on activities, small group activities, and which is similar to other RSC CO programs. Our atmosphere is learner-based, participatory, focusing on the learners and staying away from a lecture-based program. This is just a picture of a classroom in Amman, Jordan. These are some of the messages that we tackle. Talk about racism and other social issues that we, based on feedback that we receive from you through CAL and through PRM. We talk about what type of jobs, entry-level jobs, laws in the U.S. We also have a program for childcare so that refugees, when they come to our office, they can leave their kids with a certified childcare provider within our office, and the parents can focus on attending the CO session. We try to keep on developing activities based on feedback that we receive from you. And obviously you have the opportunity to send your questions to us through this webinar. And that concludes my presentation. Next is my colleague from IOM Nepal, Tracy van der Enk, the Regional Cultural Orientation Coordinator.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy van der Enk. I'm the CO coordinator from RSC South Asia. RSC South Asia covers 4 different countries: India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. The vast majority of refugees in this region are Bhutanese refugees living in 2 remaining camps located in the far eastern region of Nepal. The remaining countries have a mixed urban caseload of Afghans, Burmese, with some Somali, Iraqi, and Pakistanis. CO in Nepal is provided for 5 days and shortened if needed during periods of high departures to 3 days. In the region, CO is ideally provided for 3 days but may reduce given the number of participants and other factors. Nepal continues to be the largest site in the region with a large number of full-time staff. 5 years into the program, more than 52,000 individuals have participated in CO in South Asia. The vast majority of these have been in Nepal. While our program is reducing in size, we continue to maintain program integrity. We have integrated adult learning philosophies throughout our sessions, and it continues to be our expectation that learners take an active role in their learning and they reflect on what they learn as well as put this into practice. In addition to understanding that learners learn in different ways, we've also developed training activities which reflect the culture and traditional forms of learning, such as storytelling. Trainers have primary as well as secondary activities in their toolkit, which they can choose to utilize depending on the needs or interests present in the classroom on any given day. We also create a positive learning environment, engage children in interactive, yet simple lessons on topics such as health, hygiene, safety, and American culture. We monitor the news, internet, and at times receive feedback from refugees on how they're settling into life in the U.S. We share these firsthand experiences with refugees still in Nepal to answer their questions and provide realistic settlement information. We also take advantage of opportunities such as the CAL Trainer Exchange to hear from refugees as well as resettlement agencies and take photos of everyday life in the U.S., which we in turn use to develop resources that we share in our classrooms as well as waiting areas. While at the Transit Center in Kathmandu, refugees can also participate in additional classes. These are voluntary, and we have recently developed a class for youth which encourages them to think proactively about what they will do with their lives in the U.S. and to set up a plan for how they will achieve long and short-term goals. We also work on joint resettlement projects. Recently, we opened an ILM and UNHCR Joint Information Center located in the Langi refugee camp. This is to facilitate access to information for persons to inquire about their case, as well as learn about resettlement countries in order to make an informed decision about their future. We're also exploring CO through Skype as a means to be more flexible to provide cultural orientation for small or individual departures, as well as hard-to-reach cases within the region, particularly in Pakistan, where we have refugees residing in a number of cities and there are also security concerns. It's also very important for us to engage in extensive cross-training. We've recently hired a number of local staff in our locations in India and Pakistan who conduct CO on a less frequent basis, so they rely on the staff in Nepal to provide them guidance and mentoring. And based on feedback from the U.S. as well as from participants in our classes, we identify needs and gaps in our activities as well as program resources and develop them specific to our caseload. We utilize the skills and the talents of the trainers and see these projects as a way for them to develop other skills as well as contribute to different aspects of CO delivery. It also creates a special connection for participants when they can see and hear themselves, hear their feelings and emotions and concerns that are shared by all. And we also strongly believe that refugees should as much as possible be given the voice and be empowered to express themselves, and in this way we can all contribute to a meaningful resettlement process. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass the microphone to my colleague Peter.
Hello, I'm Peter Bogalar from the RSC in Turkey and Middle East, and my apologies, I'm fighting a cold, so if you please bear with me. RSC Turkey and Middle East covers processing and cultural orientation of refugees in Turkey, Lebanon, Kuwait, the UAE, and Yemen. Our main office is in Istanbul, and we have a sub-office in Beirut. We conduct circuit rides to each of the other sites. For 3.5 years, we have not been able to travel to Yemen due to security concerns. Each year, a small number of refugees are processed out of Yemen through the ETC in Timisoara. This past fiscal year, we had 4,634 adults and 389 youth attend our CO classes. As you can see from the numbers, we enjoy a very high level of attendance from eligible refugees. In Turkey, the numbers are high as we have to bring all refugees from one of 64 satellite cities throughout the country to Istanbul for medical screening and CO training. We have their undivided attention. In Lebanon, the number is also high as most refugees live in Beirut and are very close to departing and likely not working. Where we do not enjoy such a high percentage is in Kuwait and the Emirates. We do not have offices in these countries and provide CO on circuit rides generally once per year. Depending on timing, some departures can miss CO training opportunities. The Iraqi and the Emirates are also working full-time, and it is common for a primary applicant to send an older child or spouse to the orientation session. Whenever we are not able to provide a 3-day orientation class, we will provide at least a 1-day intensive session and send materials whenever possible. We serve a very diverse caseload in terms of language, ethnicity, and religion. There are also significant educational gaps. We can have doctors and engineers sitting beside someone who is pre-literate. Except in Lebanon, we rely on interpreting for the delivery of CO classes, which can be a limiting factor in discussions. However, the process also exposes refugee learners to English. Our classes are composed of adults ages 14 or 15 and over in all locations, and in Turkey, because refugees are assigned to one of 65 satellite cities across the country, entire families travel to Istanbul for CO and medical screening, so we have offer programs for all ages. We have child care for ages 0 to 7 and UCO for ages 8 to 14 and adult classes for 15 and over. Our training team has heard just about every possible rumor you can imagine about the U.S. RAP and living in the United States. Their expertise and my 10 years experience in domestic resettlement mean there are very few misconceptions that we can't seem to address. Rumors we have heard include free health insurance for life, housing for a year, no tax for refugees, and even Obama phones. Of course, a refugee's expectations are high. They have made a very difficult life choice to resettle to the U.S., and they want their choice to be rewarded for them and their family. Our goal is to refocus these expectations by helping the refugee learner imagine a life for life for themselves, where they are responsible for their own success through their own efforts and hard work, not someone else's. In our facilitated learning environment, we help the refugee learner identify the resources they already possess and the resources made available to them through the program, in particular, their resettlement agency caseworker. A significant portion of our training focuses on employment and responsibility of taking that first job, and yes, even an entry-level job like washing dishes. We stress employment as one of the best ways of learning and practicing English. We talk about the economic conditions in the U.S. and how difficult it is to find jobs. We ask the refugee learner what their competitive edge will be through a 3 E's activity: English, education, and experience, and explore how they will be measured against the hundreds of other people who will also be competing for that same job. We stress that experience in employment will be their #1 greatest asset. We reemphasize they will have a change of lifestyle when they get to the U.S. The doctors will likely work in a factory and women will have to go to work. The Iraqi employment videos are very popular among the refugees. We follow the PRM CAL overseas objectives indicators in our curriculum, which includes a section on health. Refugees learn about Medicaid, Medicare, and the program's limitations. Most importantly, they learn about employment-based health care. They learn that the caseworker at the resettlement agency will have a detailed information for them specific to their state and their location, and that their caseworker is their #1 resource. A highlight of the CO of our program is the CO program for youth in Turkey for ages 8 to 14. The program is designed to create a learning environment that models U.S. classroom and offers youth an opportunity to explore cultural differences they will encounter, the challenge of making new friends, peer pressure, and learning practical do's and don'ts. Classes are interactive with an instructor, an interpreter, and a diverse group of up to 10 youth at a time for 3 days of orientation. Parents and youth both discuss the role parents play in their education. There are many challenges we face delivering CO in Turkey. Delivering CO in Turkey, program constraints prevent us from providing CO classes just prior to departure. Refugees travel 4 months or even longer after completing class. That's 4 months in which our CO message can be diluted. But our biggest challenge is time. It is difficult in 3 days to introduce refugees to what they will need to know upon arrival in the United States.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you so much to all of our presenters. I think that even these brief presentations give you a good taste of the complexity, the variety, diversity in both opportunities and challenges that the programs are tackling in designing and delivering orientation for U.S.-bound refugees. So we will now move to the question and answer period. We have close to 30 minutes for that portion of the webinar. And we will start with some of the questions that you submitted prior to the webinar during the registration process, and then we will move on to some of the questions that we have received in the chat box. So the first question we will, actually before starting with these questions, I wanted to take a couple of quick questions as a clarification of a few items that apply to all of the programs. So the first one has to do with ages for orientation. Across the board, orientation is funded by PRM and provided to refugees 15 and above. As you heard in the presentation, some of the programs have been able to organize and deliver orientation for children and youth, but that is on a case-by-case and RSC basis and is not universally implemented. The other question that came that I wanted to address has to do with assessment. So it asked whether there were any overseas assessments that could be adapted for use in domestic orientation. So some of the programs do use some assessments, but in terms of domestic orientation, CAL is in the process of working with the CO work group and with PRM to develop an RMP orientation assessment that will be finalized and rolled out in the coming month or so to all of the domestic service providers. It will be available on our website, and we will communicate about that once it is completed. So the first question that you submitted that we will answer states, what input do CO coordinators use in terms of adapting their CO curricula, CO design and delivery to current realities of resettlement, especially feedback from resettlement agencies in the U.S. And we will have our colleagues Jamal and Pat tackle that question, starting with Jamal.
Good afternoon. Hi again, this is Jamal from RSC MENA. The question about the input that you provide, clearly we want to hear that input. If it comes to us, typically we hear input through PRM, through our refugee coordinator that's based in Amman, or through CAL. And for example, a few years ago we were told that Iraqis have one of the misconceptions is about the role of the resettlement agency and the availability of the caseworker. So we've developed an activity specific to that, during which we wanted them to reach the conclusion that caseworkers are professionally trained staff that are not available 24 hours, 7 days a week. The key message is that, to access the resettlement agency offices is, through regular working hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 p.m. So that's just an example among many other examples of how we will use the input that you will provide to us into the design and the development of our curriculum. Next is my colleague Pat. He also would like to tackle this question.
Hi again, everybody. I just wanted to add that all of us here get feedback from conferences like this, where we come to DC and we meet our colleagues in the resettlement world, and we also participate in exchange programs that CAL arranges. So our trainers and managers come and see the realities of resettlement in the U.S. That gives us a lot of valuable feedback to know things that we should be saying in class and adjusting our message. It helps us to be able to adjust messages. In Vienna, we learned at one point several years ago that one of the problems that the Iranian refugees were having after resettlement in the U.S. was that they were breaking driving laws. And you can basically just mention this in the CO class in Vienna and people start to smirk and smile because Iranian driving, especially Iran, is a source of amusement and terror for many of them as well. But what we do to address this, in class to help them to be ready for different driving laws and a different driving culture in the U.S. is we play a game called the Badmobile. We build a car out of chairs. We have the applicants sit in these chairs, and then we tell them this car, once you sit in it, makes you bad. And the applicants then break some of the key U.S. driving laws, the laws that you'd find in any state, and we talk about how those go from severe, would cause severe repercussions in their lives, or just smaller repercussions. But we sort of stress that breaking any law in the U.S. is a problem for a refugee, and that's usually a playful and a sort of engaging way of making our point about driving in the U.S. It's something based on what we've learned from feedback from people like you. Now I think I'm turning the mic over to Sonia again.
Thank you, Pat. The next question is a set of questions actually around how overseas CO programs address health and mental health. So we have asked Kelly and Tracy to answer those questions, starting with Kelly.
Thanks. Hello. Mental health. I'll just start by saying that I think all of us talk about mental health in the context of cultural adaptation and how stressful it is to adapt to a new culture, and acknowledge what a transition that is, and talk about the different emotions, the real highs, the lows, the extremes, and do entire lessons around that. So we really try to bring into the classroom the stresses that we know people will be facing, and that those are normal, that people shouldn't be surprised if they have these extremes in emotions and if they feel really depressed. But we also talk to them about the fact that, you know, if this continues, or if they feel concern about their own emotional health, mental health, that it's okay to speak to someone about that. They don't need to keep it a secret. It's not shameful. So we do what we can within a classroom context, but I think it's also really important to just acknowledge that our trainers, as skilled as they are not mental health professionals. So I don't believe any of us want our trainers to go beyond their depth there and get into a situation where they would be giving mental health advice. So we really try to be receptive to questions and to the conversations around mental health, but let people know that we aren't mental health professionals and that they need to address those questions with someone else if they have concerns. And I think that just, there was also a question about how our refugees feel about mental health, and I don't think that I can give a quick answer to that. I think attitudes and behaviors around mental health really vary from context to context, and even from family to family, probably culture to culture. So that brings up a larger point of trying to address attitudes and behaviors around some of these more challenging topics, mental health being one of them, but there's also, you know, domestic violence, discipline, and some of the others that come up in CO class. And my approach, and I believe everyone's, is to not shy away from these topics. We introduce U.S. law and consequences around breaking laws, but again, it's just not realistic for any of us to think that we would be changing attitudes, established attitudes and behaviors in a matter of hours or days. So we really just try to open the door for conversation around these topics, be clear about what U.S. laws are, what U.S. norms are, and talk about the consequences that might be involved with breaking laws or, going against norms. And I'll turn it over to Tracy, who will say more about this.
I think Kelly has quite extensively covered how we address this topic in our classrooms. One of the resources that we developed several years ago in Nepal in response to some feedback we received in the U.S. was to develop a video on culture shock, whereby it shows the experiences of a recently arrived Bhutanese family in the U.S. They experience difficulty learning English, there's alcohol abuse, domestic violence, children are acting out and not going to school. And the point of this video was to introduce a series of very important and complicated issues, to emphasize that culture shock is a normal process, but to understand when these things are going on in one's family or in their environment, that they can identify it, know that they can seek help, and find ways to have support through this transition. So this is one of the tools that we use to emphasize the larger messages that Kelly has identified earlier.
The next question submitted asks, what are the gaps that CO coordinators identify as needing to be filled or areas of most confusion, uncertainty for refugees after attending CO, and what needs to be reinforced after arrival? So Rhonda and Stas will take on that question.
So in an African context, I would say that there are a couple of issues that we see concerns expressed by refugees across caseloads. The number one issue is parenting with young children. And certainly our trainers discuss parenting practices in the U.S., how what's acceptable in terms of discipline, child supervision standards in the U.S., and how that's quite different than most African communities, and as well as U.S. law related to parenting, discipline, and child abuse. Despite the conversations that tend to be very interactive, sometimes very engaged and animated, I would say the vast majority of refugees just cannot understand how they can possibly control their children without the use of corporal punishment. So we certainly present some other approaches, timeouts, withholding privileges, those types of things, and it's just such a completely different context for the refugees we're seeing that I definitely see this as a major issue, and I expect that you do as well upon arrival in the U.S. The other issue that I think there's a real gap around is equality of genders. I think there's just this perception amongst, it's come up with Somalis, the Congolese, in many different classes. There's this idea that women's rights in the U.S. are so elevated that in the list of who holds the power, it would be women first, children, dogs, and then men. So there's a lot of concern about just sort of the power dynamics, how they're going to change once families arrive in the U.S. And certainly we talk about women in relationship to employment and the need to be flexible in terms of gender roles, and that's often when this concern comes up. The last point in terms of a gap is related to concerns about being able to follow religious practices and sort of being able to do that in the context of the demands of a job. So for example, in Gihembe camp in Rwanda, the home of the new P2 group, many of those refugees are Seventh-day Adventists, and they are very concerned about having to work on Saturdays. Similarly, many of our Muslim refugees are concerned about being able to take prayer breaks during the day. So those are some examples from Africa. And I'll turn the mic over to my colleague Stas.
Hi again. In terms of gaps, I just wanted to add something specific to our mission. Refugees going through the emergency transit centers would very often be mixed in the camp setting together with refugees bound for different European countries. And what we found is that when CO is delivered to those going to Europe, and when the refugees going to those countries are presented with all those benefits that they're going to get, and no necessity to find jobs. So this kind of affects our refugees as well, because it's really hard to deal with those kind of expectations that they had from US. So hopefully those expectations are dealt with properly during CO that we do for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Stas. The next question was a specific question for RSC Latin America. And the person who submitted the question wanted to know what fears come up in CO and how these are addressed. Matt?
Well, in my presentation, I mentioned 4 major fears that, that Colombians have regarding resettlement to the United States. One is about learning English, another about finding employment and having rights as an employee, the limited time that they receive benefits, and then also about family reunification. We address all of these concerns as they come up in CO by just reinforcing information that's available in the curriculum that's already integrated. Also at RSC Latin America, we're with the refugees from pre-CIS all the way until their departure, so CO can occur anywhere, including as they're waiting to get on the plane. Another concern that often comes up that we have to address in CO with Colombians is that they hear a lot about immigrants being deported, Latino immigrants being deported, or having problems in the U.S. And we have to spend a lot of time in our COs to explain to them that they are they arrive with legal status. They're able to work. They're able to eventually become a citizen. And we really focus in our unit on rights and responsibilities and the legal status that they have to make sure that these kind of concerns are taken care of.
Thank you, Matt. There was also a specific question for RSC Cuba regarding how secondary migration is addressed in orientation and other communication with refugees. Ana Maria?
Yeah. Well, my name is Ana Maria from RSC Havana, and I would like to answer this question because that is a hole in the Havana cultural orientation. Also, our effort to explain them how important it is to provide accurate and updated information of relatives in Florida, that Florida do not accept free cases and that they should lose their benefits. They continue with this practice. In fact, most of the Cuban refugees have relatives in Florida, and we believe that they are a bad influence of them. They sit down in Florida and later apply for benefits in other sponsoring agencies, and they receive it. We really will appreciate any suggestion of the domestic resettlement side regarding this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Next, Peter Vogelar from RSC Turkey and Middle East will answer a couple of questions regarding, first, what is communicating regarding schools in the United States in overseas orientation, and then next, what is communicated regarding the importance of learning English upon resettlement. Peter?
Thank you, Sonia. In terms of schools, when we have parents in the classroom, we spend quite a bit of time helping them understand what's going to happen in a classroom environment in the United States. We specifically talk about the importance of their children's education and how they will participate in that education, that the education style in the United States is not one of parents separated from the learning of their children. So this comes up time and time again throughout the sessions on education. We also talk a little bit about the challenge of role reversal between parents and children, and we have a case study that talks a little bit about this, about their children being able to learn English faster than them, what the implications are for that. We talk to them about how important it is for them, if they get a note home from school, to not just ignore the note, but actually find someone who can read it with them, and not rely solely on their children for that as well. When it comes to employment, we do stress that English education and experience will help them in their employment opportunities in the United States. We do stress that what they have in their background, the experiences that they've had, will benefit them through employment, and that English, of course, is critical. We also talk about the fact that learn English on the job. That's a good way to offer to them. We work with everyone from doctors, lawyers, to farmers, and we stress what are entry-level jobs, what are those beginning jobs, what's going to be expected of them, and that employment is first and primary. There was one question that specific to our programs in UAE about processing, and as processing from the time frame for processing between registration and CO. For the UAE, almost the entire caseload we have is our professionals. They are working in jobs in the UAE. Their visas are tied to their employment, and if that employment opportunity is lost, they lose their visa and would have to return. They wouldn't be able to stay in the UAE. So those are the individuals we're working with. So yes, many of them are very well educated, and many of them are professionals in their field, which makes it, the time frame is also, it can all depend. We do about one circuit ride a year for pre-screening, one circuit ride a year for DHS, and then one circuit ride a year for cultural orientation, which means the time frame can be rather long for these individuals.
Thank you, Peter. We do not have a lot of time left. We have about 5 minutes, so we'll tackle a few more questions. We will start with Rhonda. She will answer a question regarding CO for Congolese refugees. Then both Rhonda and Tracy will answer a question about how overseas CO programs work on creating learner-centered environment with heterogeneous populations in terms of mixed literacy, languages, cultural backgrounds, and education levels. So we will start with Rhonda and the question about CO for Congolese refugees.
So we decided to extend CO for the Congolese from 3 to 5 days for a number of reasons. I think there are some particular vulnerabilities that have been noticed amongst this group. For example, the high proportion of female-headed households, high levels of trauma and gender-based violence. I think also there is a recognition that this is a growing caseload for RSC Africa and the USRP as a whole. And in doing CO for this group, I think in doing more CO for this group, we have the opportunity to have a greater impact on preparing this group for, you know, and impacting the USRP as a whole, really. We actually do 5 days of CO for Central African refugees in Chad as well, because we've noticed that there's lesser exposure to U.S. culture. They've really needed some additional time. In terms of the other question about how to keep a classroom learner centered with varied education levels and mixed classes, basically, I would just mention that we really, I think all CO programs try to use a variety of teaching methodologies in any given class to make sure that we're addressing diverse learning styles. Training materials that are pictorial, passed around the room, you know, activities, minimizing lecture, and really doing a variety of things in one setting. And we will use, for example, literate students as maybe a recorder in a small group session, which, you know, sort of plays on the strengths of that mixed classroom, whereas pre-literate students aren't able to write on behalf of the group. So I will turn it over to Tracy for another perspective.
I think underlying this question is how can we create a meaningful experience for everyone? In our caseload, we also have a number of persons who are pre-literate, elderly with mixed education levels. So one of the first things that we do is work on attitude, creating a positive learning environment where everyone feels that they can come to class, that they can contribute, that they can learn, and that they can also teach others. So it's changing this attitude and acknowledging that people can participate in different ways, and that's okay, as long as they are present and involved. Then they also can make meaning or get meaning from this experience.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I think this is a wonderful way and a wonderful message to conclude the webinar with. We received a flurry of questions in the last, throughout the webinar, and then in the last 5-10 minutes, which we will not be able to answer. But as I mentioned, we will collect these questions, and we will attempt to answer them working with our overseas CO colleagues in writing and disseminate the answers to participants. One final comment before we sign off. There were a couple of questions about where the resources that were mentioned, including the welcome set and the videos, can be found, and they're all on the CAL website, www.culturalorientation.net, and they're all there for you to use and disseminate. Their group-specific resources, general resources for orientation, so please do access those and disseminate them. The final word has to do with a survey that I mentioned previously. Please, as you sign off, take a minute to fill out the survey. We thank you all very much for participating in the webinar. It has become a cherished tradition for us to conduct this webinar on a yearly